Today's reading comes from the book of Matthew, chapter 21, verses 1 through 22. Now when they drew near to Jerusalem and came to Bethphage, to the Mount of Olives, then Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, 'The Lord needs them,' and he will send them at once." This took place to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet, saying, "Say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a beast of burden." The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put on them their cloaks, and he sat on them. Most of the crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. And the crowds that went before him and that followed him were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest!" And when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred up, saying, "Who is this?" And the crowd said, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth of Galilee." And Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. He said to them, "It is written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer,' but you make it a den of robbers." And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children crying out in the temple, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they were indignant, and they said to him, "Do you hear what these are saying?" And Jesus said to them, "Yes, have you never read, out of the mouth of infants and nursing babies you have prepared praise?" And leaving them, he went out of the city to Bethany and lodged there. In the morning, as he was returning to the city, he became hungry. And seeing a fig tree by the wayside, he went to it and found nothing on it but only leaves. And he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." And the fig tree withered at once. When the disciples saw it, they marveled, saying, "How did the fig tree wither at once?" And Jesus answered them, "Truly, I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, 'Be taken up and thrown into the sea,' it will happen. And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith."
All right, good morning. Hey, I'll just remind you real quick. So we're starting in on, what the church, for quite a while is often referred to as Holy Week, right? This week that's sort of set apart from others, that reminds us of the climactic events in the life of Christ, the climactic events of his kingdom, and our own redemption as well, too. And so as part of that, at Grace Church, we have some increased ways that you can come and worship and remember and celebrate all that. Starting tonight, there's a night of worship and prayer here in the sanctuary at 6:30. Kind of like to kick off, today, all of today, really kicking off this whole Holy Week. So we'll be here in the sanctuary tonight. Friday, we have our Tenebrae service, and that's a joint service that we do with Faith Reformed Baptist over in Media. We've been doing that with them for a few years. Kind of just a night where you just remember through song and prayer, just a very simple service, the night or the day of Christ's crucifixion. And then on Sunday morning, nice sunrise service. I don't know if it's my favorite service. No, probably not. But anyway, I love the service. We do it at 6 o'clock in the morning over at Chester Park. Great view of the sunrise over there, clouds permitting. If you haven't been there and if you don't know where Chester Park is, there are maps available in the lobby where we'll be located. Basically, you just ride down the main stretch and you'll see a little lantern dangling there. And that's usually Jeffrey waving the lantern. That's where we're set up. And then, of course, at 10 o'clock, we have our resurrection celebration here, like we do each week, followed by a meal, extended meal in the gym. So come if you're able, plan to stick around. Really, just come. I would encourage you, take advantage of all these opportunities, really, to just kind of re-enter and remember and rehearse and to celebrate together. There's so much of an emphasis throughout the scriptures, especially in the Old Testament, of the importance of setting apart times and weeks to remember and to rehearse like these climactic events of our redemption, so that they continue throughout the year to be really the center point of our lives and the center of really what drives and motivates our worship. So take advantage of these. I'll also say, too, some of our grace groups are having a sort of a Last Supper remembrance as well that meet throughout the week. If you're not a part of a grace group but would like to get in on one of that, let me know, and I'll make arrangements for that to happen, okay? I think all that's in your e-news as well, too, so if you need times or just check all that. So, but today, Palm Sunday, right, kicks it all off. Our lectionary has us here in this passage in Matthew 21, Jesus' entry into the city. You know, I was thinking about this week, like it's a little bit ironic, I don't know, coincidental, that we would be remembering this Palm Sunday and Jesus' royal or triumphal entry into the city. The day after, I don't know if you picked it up in the news, right? Maybe some of you were there. Downtown, we had the third annual No Kings protest or march down in the Parkway. Kate and I were walking down in the city on Friday night, just going for a walk, and saw along the Parkway all the porta potties. Kate thought there may be a parade for one of the winning, because that's what she associates that with when we go down to the Eagles parades or whatever. No, that's for the march or the protest that was going on. Right? They're down there yesterday protesting current administration and what they perceive as an overreach of his executive authority, right? Going beyond maybe his power and bypassing, standard operating procedures of going to Congress or whatever, as we go to war and all that sort of stuff, right? So no kings. And I would fully imagine that there are others, who maybe have a different political persuasion and, like that he's exercising more of a role of a king and he's not waiting around for congressional authority. He's just started getting things done. And maybe you kind of like that because you see what the ways that he is acting, the things that he's getting done, they align more with the things that you desire, or he is restoring or bringing back a way of life that you feel was endangered or threatened or whatever. And I would imagine, if and I'm not diving into any of the political stuff behind all that, but I would certainly imagine that if the next administration comes in from a different political persuasion and is doing the same thing, exercising executive authority beyond what is the standard norms, maybe the people on the other side would be coming down and having a No Kings march as well, too. But it sort of highlights that point that, in this cradle of liberty, right, Philadelphia, we have a 250-year history of shaking off the authority of kings, right, in the name of liberty and autonomy. Yeah, but then there's sometimes where we're okay with, a king, maybe, or someone who acts more like a king and gets things done and works in our favor, or works to deliver or to save from a kind of life that we fear, perhaps. Or I think even in that, there's, this broader reminder, as we even just think of that notion of shaking off kings and authority in the name of personal autonomy and personal liberty. Like we do well to remember that doesn't necessarily mean that you shake off kings and external authority and all of a sudden our lives are full of freedom and liberty. What more likely means is that now our lives are perhaps beholden to or subject to, maybe even enslaved to, masters of a different sort, the non-visible kind, the more subtle kind that take roots in our hearts, right? What's the famous quote from Les Mis? There are those who are masters of their own lives and yet slaves to their passions. They have no kings, but plenty of tyrants, right? Some of you, right, isn't that sort of what the season of Lent is aimed at? exposing maybe certain things in our hearts and lives that have this unholy authority over our lives. I was talking with some of you this week, who have decided for certain days during Lent, you're putting your phone down when you're at home and you're not picking up your phone. And you're confessing or you're admitting to, man, there's sometimes this eerie, uncomfortable silence in moments in life where you would otherwise go and grab that phone and distract yourself or amuse yourself or whatever, but it's almost like you don't know what to do in that eerie moment. Or there's some I've heard this week who have, mentioned that, in days of fasting, you're realizing how much I have spent my day just sort of indulging, whatever little want or need or desire or lack comes across. And in now a day where I'm not doing that, man, I feel like there's a difficulty there. Like my life had become so ingrained to just satisfying every little desire that come along. And maybe, right, those desires, those impulses, they had this sort of unholy authority over my life. And I had bowed the knee and I had subjected, which is all just simply to say, yeah, we have this mantra, no kings. Long-standing, as good Americans, no kings. And yet we have something of a much more nuanced relationship to authority and to masters and to tyrants in a way. We'll come back to that, but it's all just sort of to say here at the beginning, if you can understand some of the, I don't know if I want to call that a tension or just sort of a nuanced, different perspective on that, like you're set up well to put yourself into this story and understand the story as Matthew is telling it here and what he wants you to see. Right, this is the scene where Jesus is coming intentionally to reveal himself as the king to the city of kings, right? Matthew will later refer to Jerusalem in the book of Matthew as the city of kings, right? And he's coming very intentionally, very deliberately, very well planned to make his public revealing to Jerusalem as the king that they've long awaited for, right? We've seen that as we've been working through the season of Epiphany and then Lent, right? The unveiling of the glory of the king. And with that, like teaching and explanation and demonstrations of what his kingdom is all about, right? But to this point, like most of that has happened up in the north of Israel, up in the Galilee. All right, but now that message is coming to the city of kings. He's being very deliberate. There's all these sort of like symbols that are pointing back to prophecies from the Old Testament, whether it's, him coming, the route where he has him coming into the east, right? The prophet Ezekiel looked forward to the day when the glory of the Lord would be revealed coming from the east. Or as he stops on the Mount of Olives, Zechariah 14, when the king would come to his holy city to restore and to deliver his feet. First, Zechariah 14:4, first we'll stand on the Mount of Olives. Right, or even as he comes, on a colt, or on the donkey, on the mule, right? Zechariah 9, behold, your king comes to you humble and having salvation on a donkey, on the foal of a donkey, right? And even in that scene, like I think there's something deliberate in that. Like I don't think Jesus is telling his disciples, okay, go into town and go quietly and go look for, where you can see a donkey or a mule tied up and just go quietly untie that and bring it to me. And if anybody asks you, say, oh, well, the king is in need of this, I'll bring it back. No, he's probably arranged this all so that when you go and you find this donkey tied up, you take it. If anybody asks, you say, yes, this is what you're supposed to say. The king is in need of it. Okay, got it. That right? So it's almost like there's this intentionality, there's this deliberateness where Jesus is coming, announcing or revealing himself as Israel's long-awaited king. Right? Hosanna. Or even that quote, say to the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of beasts of burden. And I just want to highlight, so the key verse, perhaps, of the whole passage is down in verse 9, where you have like part of the crowd shouting Hosanna to the Son of David. And then as it's moving into the city, like you have the rest of the city and all the other crowds that are coming out. And it says right there, they were stirred up. Or there's something deeply unsettled in them, according to the text, such that they would say, and maybe this is the key phrase, who is this? Right? That's the question. So we're going to talk it through in these three scenes. The entry, all of which is all these scenes are a little bit strange, right? The entry into Jerusalem, where he goes when he comes into Jerusalem, into the temple, and what he does there, it's a little bit odd. And then this last scene with this fig tree. There's no fruit for him to eat, and so he curses the whole tree. May you never bear fruit again. What's that all about? We'll get there. Okay, but this first scene, where he enters into the city, and if you've grown up in the church, you probably have heard this referred to as the triumphal entry, which is interesting because I don't know if anybody on the ground in that day would have viewed this as his triumphal entry. And the reason for that is because they knew what triumphal entries were. Like that was a thing back then, especially in Rome. Right? If you were a military general and you had gone out beyond the boundaries of the Roman Empire and you had conquered some new land or some new territory to bring it into the Roman Empire, if you were coming back to Rome, maybe you would want to have a triumphal entry into the city. And so actually, I don't know how it would work. You would put a request in, I guess, and the Senate would actually vote whether or not to give you a triumphal entry. And if they voted to give you a triumphal entry, then, oh yes, you were allowed to come in. And usually as you came in this triumphal entry, man, it was a big old parade, a big old fanfare. You know, at the front line of the parade, you would have all the captives, right? The prisoners, the slaves that you had conquered in this new land that you had claimed. You know, followed by, I don't know, the ancient equivalent of flatbeds, where you would have all the spoils of war, and you would have all the treasures and all the goods that you had plundered from this new territory, and you were bringing back into the glorious city of Rome. Followed by your military, right? Your soldiers and all their swords and their spears and their horses and their chariots. Followed by the climactic, right? You riding in, this conquering general riding in, you know, being pulled in a chariot by 4 stallions. Oh, and you would also have then, like in the last in line, would be usually a slave who would be whispering into the ear of the general, memento mori, I forget, memento mori, all the way through the towns. The crowds are crying out, memento mori, remember you too shall die, right? You know, stay humble there, brother, even as everybody's, yeah. So on the one hand, like that's not what's happening here. Jesus is not coming in with, the captives. He's not coming in with flatbeds of the spoils, and he's not coming in. His people who are following them are not these grand military people with their swords and shields and all of this. So it's a little bit different, a little odd, right? But it is a royal entry for sure. And you pick that up, even just the choice of the mule and the donkey. That's not just a symbol of humility. That was, throughout Israel's history, what kings rode into Jerusalem on as they were going to their coronation, right? You can go back into the Old Testament. David rode in on a donkey or a mule. Solomon did. Right? There's a whole scene in 1 Kings where Adonijah is making a play for the throne and the kingdom. And David's like, no, Solomon's the one who's going to inherit it. So he gets his advisors. He says, hey, get Solomon on the mule and have him ride into town, because that would signal, oh, this is the king that we've been waiting for, right? Or whether it's the cries of the people coming out, shouting, yes, save us. Blessed is he who comes, save us, Son of David. Right, that's a royal title there, to be a son of David, right, is the rightful heir to the throne. Save us, Son of David, that's a quote, Hosanna, all that. That's a quote from Psalm 118, which would be a psalm that was sort of like reserved for the day when the great, long-awaited Messianic king would come back to his kingdom. Right, then the people would gather and shout, Hosanna, save us, O Son of David. It was actually a blasphemous thing to say if you didn't actually think that this was the long-awaited Messianic king. Or even the palm branches. All this imagery to say that, okay, maybe it's not triumphal entry, but it is a royal entry, right? This idea of them coming and waving their palm branches. and putting the palm branches down, like there's rich symbolism here. I think I've shown you, I forgot to mention this slide. I'll come back to that one. But I think I've shown you this picture here before, maybe last year when we were at Palm Sunday. I think this is titled The Three Kings. And all the way to the left, you have Joshua, and in the middle, you have David, and then all the way on the right is this other guy, extra biblical character, Judas Maccabeus, and we talk about him, from time to time. You think about all three of these characters. What did all three of them do? Right? They conquered territory in Israel, and they delivered Israel from, the foreign powers. So whether it's Joshua, who leads the people into the promised land at the very beginning, right, and conquers the foreign entities that are there at the time, or whether it's David, who conquers Jerusalem, seizes it from the Philistines. Well, I don't know if anyway, but you know that story. Or then this other event, not 200 years prior to when Jesus comes on the scene. Israel is overrun by the Greek Empire and Antiochus Epiphanes, right? And I think it's his Seleucid Empire that is, controlling Israel, and they're desecrating the city. Antiochus is setting up his abomination of desecration in the temple and forcing all of Israel to worship that and become good Hellenized Greeks. And it's this guy, it's the Maccabeus family that starts a revolt out in the hillside. And they start fighting back against the Greek armies. And eventually they work their way into Jerusalem, and they purge the city of these foreign pagan influences, and they cleanse up and purify the temple. And as he's taking his victory lap and re-entering the city, everybody's coming out, and guess what they're waving? Yeah, they're waving their palm branches. The great liberator has come, right? So, so much symbolism in here. But again, there's a little bit of uncertainty, and there's a little bit of tension in it. And you see that in the second scene. So he enters into the city, not in a triumphal entry necessarily, but in a royal entry nonetheless. And he goes into the temple. Right? In first order of business, he goes into the temple and he starts overthrowing the tables of the money changers, the dove sellers, and he's driving out, it says, all those who are buying and selling in the temple. Okay, and if, maybe it makes sense to us, on this side of, the story 2,000 years later. But if you're on the ground there and you're in the temple and you're watching this king coming in and doing this, you're confused at best. Right? You're confused at best that that this king would first of all come into the temple, to the heart of Jewish life and culture, and do his unsettling stuff there. Like you would say, Jesus, it's just around the corner. We can literally just walk down the street and we can go to the palace of Pilate or Herod Antipas, who's right there in all of his luxury. Isn't that where we should be going and unsettling things and overthrowing things and driving people out? Isn't that what this is all about? Why are you coming here and causing such a ruckus? Or there's maybe others who are saying, okay, well, wait a second. This is Passover week. Right? The city is quadrupling in size as people are coming from all over Israel and even beyond Israel to make their annual pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And what do you do? What are you supposed to do when you come to Jerusalem? You're supposed to offer sacrifices. And so if you're going to offer sacrifice, you need animals. And so, at best, it's a whole lot more convenient is after we come all this way and we come into Jerusalem, we can get our animal right here in the temple and we can go offer it for sacrifice. And of course, you can't buy an animal for sacrifice using, the common pagan money and coinage. You have to exchange that for the holy currency. So you got to take your Roman coins, you got to exchange that for your shekels. Thank you. Yes, for your shekels. Right? So all this. So what are we doing here? It's almost like, how are we going to sacrifice? How are we going to offer sacrifices on the Passover week if you're driving out all the people who bring in the animals? Or how are we even going to get animals if we can't exchange our currency here for the holy currency that you need to buy stuff in the temple? And we don't get a whole lot of commentary on this. Like Matthew doesn't necessarily explain it. All he does is he gives us this verse, actually two verses. Jesus quotes from Isaiah 56. My house should be a house of prayer for all nations. And then he mashes that with Jeremiah 7, but you have turned it into a den of thieves or a den of robbers. So, okay, let's camp here for just a second. Like, well, what does all that mean? What does it mean that you've turned this into a den of robbers or thieves? Maybe it has something to do with the whole buying and selling in the temple. Like maybe, do that out. They technically weren't in the temple. They were in the courtyard of the temple complex. But maybe, you do that somewhere outside of town or outside the temple complex. Or maybe, like in particular, when it says he's going after those who are selling the doves in the temple, who was it that would come and buy the doves for sacrifice? Right, the poor. Right, those who didn't have money to buy your lambs or your goats or your bulls, right, your more expensive animals. Right, you think of like Mary and Joseph when they brought Jesus to the temple for dedication. They didn't have the resources. They're just poor country peasants, all they have. And so they were allowed to just give the dove sacrifice. So, maybe when the text highlights specifically that he's overturning, the tables of those selling the doves, maybe they're selling these doves at exorbitant prices to take advantage of the poor. Or maybe the money changers are doing the same things. They're charging higher rates of exchange so they can pad their pockets on the heels of the poor who are simply coming to the house of the Lord to pray or to receive mercy. Or maybe it's even bigger than that. We think of that whole phrase, den of thieves and den of robbers, and actually I want to show you the extended quote from where that comes from in Jeremiah. Let me just read this for you. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel. And this is as Israel is about to go into exile, as Babylon is about to take them over. Amend your ways and your deeds, and then I will let you dwell in this place. Do not trust in these deceptive words. This is the temple of the Lord. This is the temple of the Lord. This is the temple of the Lord. Instead, if you truly amend your ways and your deeds, if you truly execute justice one with another, if you don't oppress the sojourner, the fatherless, or the widow, or shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not go after other gods to your own harm, then I will let you dwell in this place, in the land that I gave of old to your fathers forever. Behold, you trust in deceptive words to no avail. Will you steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, and go after other gods that you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house which is called by my name, and say, oh, we are delivered, only to go on doing all those abominations? Do you see in the broader context the charge here? You oppress the migrant, the widows, the orphans. You kill, murder, swear falsely, commit adultery, make offerings to Baal, and you go running, chasing after all these other gods. Oh, but then you come to this place and you make your sacrifices and your sins are atoned for and you're forgiven and you say, oh, we are delivered, just to be able to go back out to your way. Like it sounds like some old mafia movie where the guys are going out and they're stealing and killing or whatever, and then they come to the Catholic Church and they make their confession to the priest and he says, whatever they say, I absolve you of your sins, go and, whatever, right? Like when you see it in that context, and then you read this line, has this house, which is called by my name, become a den of robbers in your eyes? You realize, maybe the emphasis is not on the robbers per se, but on that den part, right? You go and you live life on your own terms, however you want, you take, exploit, and then you come here as if this is some safe haven for you, and you offer your sacrifices, and we are atoned for, and this is the temple of the Lord, and because the temple is still standing, God is in our midst, and he will protect and deliver and care for us. And maybe Jesus is, actually throwing the whole thing out. All who are buying and selling, all who are exchanging money so you can buy animals for sacrifice, all you dove sellers, get out. Maybe it's like this whole sacrificial system. Maybe it has to go because all it has done is provide a den for thieves and robbers. Or actually one more thing. one more little, maybe a slight little twist to the whole thing. That whole word, robbers, thieves, I forget the actual Greek term, but by the time of Jesus, like it actually meant more than just a common ordinary thief. Like it actually, in Jesus' day, that term actually referred to more of like a violent rebel or a political revolutionary. There's actually somebody in the story of this Holy Week that will be called a robber or a thief. It's a little bit later on when Jesus is standing in the court of Pontius Pilate. And as was custom in that, festive holiday, the local magistrate would release one of the prisoners. And so Pilate says, "Let me release to you Jesus." And the crowd say, No. Crucify that guy. Give us Barabbas. And the text says, depending on which translation you're reading, Barabbas the thief. Or in some translations, Barabbas the zealot. Or Barabbas the revolutionary. Or Barabbas the rebel, right? They want Barabbas not because he's a common ordinary thief. They want Barabbas because he's skilled with a knife. Because he's a zealot, because he knows how to take down the political oppression within the gates, right? And so give us that guy back. Which is to say that maybe Jesus is saying, look, this whole system, this whole kingdom operation you got with your emphasis on greed and wealth and now power and might and violence, all that you then baptize somehow here in the temple complex, this whole thing is corrupt and broken, and maybe the whole thing has to go. Maybe there's a whole new system, kingdom that is coming in. A whole new sacrifice that will finally and fully atone for the rampant sins of his people. And as it atones for the sins of the people, somehow it draws them closer to the glory of God and the power of God that was, and back in that day was holed up in the back room of that temple complex. But maybe now, as the sin is fully and finally atoned for, there can be this coming together of sinners and the power and the glory of God himself, such that there is actually change and newness of life that comes. Right? As their sins are atoned for and forgiven, and they're drawn closer into the presence of the glory of God. Maybe they begin to experience some of that resurrection and life that Jesus talked about when he was with Martha outside the tomb of Lazarus last week, right? I am the resurrection and life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And as they believe in me and associate and fellowship with me, even in the right here and right now, they become some way, in some fashion, participants in the victory that I am wrestling out of the grave, victory over the powers of sin and death. Right? And then maybe they begin to experience, with this new life, this depth of satisfaction and joy that they hadn't known before, such that it makes all their other pursuits and the gods that they went chasing after and this, that, and the other feel somewhat lame, like when he was talking to the woman at the well in Samaria. Or as they experience this new life, maybe their eyes are finally open to see the kingdom in its true glory and its true intent. And not only see it, but have hearts that desire to play a part in that, like Jesus was saying to Nicodemus, right, that we saw a few weeks ago. Or maybe then their lives, like Paul was pleading with his church as we were looking in Ephesians 5, their lives now reflect more the light of Christ. And as it moves out into the darkened kingdoms, like now are living witnesses to the glory of the light and can cry out, "Wake up, rise up, you sinner, from the realm of the dead, and the light and the glory of Christ will shine on you." Anyway. It's just to say, I think what Jesus is doing here, it's all of the above. All of this has to go. There's something new coming in. And the reason I say that, I think, is because of the last two scenes. Actually, right before he comes to the tree. Did you pick it up? Who comes to Jesus in the temple? It's the blind and the lame. And that is striking. That is an indicator that things are changing. Because if you go back and you read the old Mosaic law, it's actually questionable whether the blind and the lame were allowed to come into the temple for worship and sacrifice. Or if you go read certain passages in 1st and 2nd Samuel about King David, like you read that he had a certain disdain for the blind and the lame. Right now, there's this new king who's coming that welcomes into his presence, into the holiest of places, those, even the blind and the lame. And because of his compassion and love and mercy for them, they are healed in the fullest way. Right? Or then who is it? You almost imagine that the cries and the praises of the crowds have sort of maybe quieted just a little bit, as Jesus is doing these strange things in the temple. But who is it that's still standing at the end and crying, Hosanna, save us, Son of David? It's the children, who back in that day, they didn't idolize the way we maybe do in our modern. These were the nobodies. These were the people on the bottom of the social ladder. Maybe illustrating what we have seen as Jesus is declaring the good news of the arrival of the kingdom, that it's often those who are on those bottom rungs, those who have impoverished spirits, who are meek, who hunger and thirst, who maybe are actually closest to the kingdom, because maybe they see, there is something much deeper, much grander that this king is actually going after, and I am desperately in need of it. Yeah. And then we were originally going to stop at verse 17, but I wanted you to just consider this fruit tree, because I think it proves the point. He goes out of the city, goes and stays at Bethany, perhaps with Mary and Martha and Lazarus, who lived in Bethany, right, as good friends. And the next day, he's going back into the city to do his teaching and his ministry and his healing and whatever. And on the way, he comes along a fig tree that's just full of leaves but no fruit. And he curses the tree. It says, may you never bear fruit again. And you wonder, what is that all about? Is he really hungry? Did he not get breakfast this morning? Is he fasting? What is that? Until you read some of those prophets in the Old Testament. And you read from Micah. Do I have it? Nope, I don't. Never mind. I'll read it for you. And you read passages of Micah. Woe is me, for I have become as when the summer fruit has been gathered and when the grapes have been gleaned, and there is no cluster to eat, no first ripe fig that my soul desires. And then he explains what he means. The godly have perished from the earth. There is no one upright among mankind. They all lie in wait for blood. Each hunts the other with a net. Their hands are on what is evil to do it well. The prince, the judge, they ask for bribes, and the great man utters his evil desire of his soul, and they weave it all together. Numerous times, read through the book of Micah, comparing Israel and its fullness to this fig tree that has bare no fruit because of their sin and unrighteousness. And so when Jesus pronounces a curse on this blessing, may you bear no more fruit, all he's doing, he's echoing the words of the prophet that say there's a day that's coming where this whole kingdom, this whole way of life is going to be cursed and it's going to be torn down. And Micah has ominous prophetic warnings where every stone will be thrown down and the Temple Mount will just sort of become like this wooded hill. Again, which is simply to say, we got to draw this to a close, simply to say, what is this king doing? He's coming in here and he's disrupting, he's unsettling, he's tearing down. It's like he's throwing out the whole thing to make way for this new kingdom that he's bringing. Right, or in other words, to put it like this is a king who's coming. Don't miss it. He is intending to be revealed as his king, but he has much greater aims than, just political oppression or the problem of Rome or the external circumstances that bind his people. He's not coming interested in just shaking off whatever external authorities are binding his people so that they can just live lives and go in pursuits of their own little kingdoms however they want on their own terms. No, he's coming for something much closer to home. He's coming for sin and unrighteousness within the gates, right? Which means he's coming for something that's all the more unsettling because it's close to home. It's much more sacred. It's much more beloved, right? And so to receive this king, man, you understand, okay, that's a much heavier thing. And so actually when you go back, you begin to wonder, who really gets it? Those who are out there waving their palm branches saying, save us, O King, O Son of David? Or the people in the city who see it and are deeply unsettled and ask, who is this? And as we bring it to a close, like I would just say, as you go into the week, like that's the question for you, right? It's that same opportunity, right? You have, as we enter into the story, as we remember and rehearse, and we see the King in all of his glory, like you have this opportunity again to receive him still, as the old like Christmas hymn puts it, like receive him in. But to do that, like you understand, like he's to, as Danny mentioned, like to cry out, Hosanna. That's not just a cry of happy, joyful praise and celebration. Like that reads as a prayer of confession. It's to say, save us, O God, right? To join in that and to confess that is to say, man, there are things, there are passions, there are desires, there are dreams in my own heart. There are fears and anxieties. There are goals and ambitions and aims and pursuits, all of which perhaps have this unholy authority in my life and have this power to keep me from the life that my Creator intends for me. They have the power to keep me from seeing, from embracing, participating in the kingdom of this King. They have the power to keep me from loving sacrificially, painfully perhaps, as an act of self-donation in the manner of the King. These things have a power to keep my life from being this radiant demonstration of the light of the King as I move out into the darkened place. In other words, to say, save us, O Son of David, is to recognize that this King is not necessarily interested in coming and being a prop to your own kingdom and getting out of the way the things that would prevent you from living your own life in pursuit of your own kingdom on your own terms, right? Or he's not so concerned to come and to deal with all the sinful, broken stuff that we see out there and we lament, but rather he wants to come in and do that perhaps unsettling, painful work in your own heart and life so that we together can be the light of this kingdom that exposes all that may not be right out there. Or if maybe you're here and you're considering all of this and you are curious about this Jesus and you come and maybe you're like the crowds in the city. You hear everybody else shouting Hosanna and there's something unsettling about that. Right? Because everything in you wants to cry out as we're talking about this King with his authority. Everything in you wants to sort of cry out or else write on some banner and hold up, no kings. Right? Because the mantra of your own soul is that I should be the captain of my own soul, the master of my own fate, or however the quote goes. And maybe I would just, it would just throw that challenge back to you, like we said at the beginning, like you understand that just to shake off external authority doesn't mean that you are living these free libertarian lives. It may very well mean that your life is now beholden to, captive to, enslaved by these other passions and desires that make for excellent tyrants. Like I wonder, if you imagine life where you're not able to maybe succeed or win the affirmation or the approval of those around you. Or if you imagine life and you look down the corridors of time and maybe you don't see that clear future of security, whether it's financial security, whatever it is, but instead you see a future that has maybe some uncertain days to it. Or if you just look at your life and you imagine it where you couldn't attain to your goals and dreams and desires, is that deeply unsettling to you? And if it is, it's possible that you are beholden to other desires and passions that have this tyrannical, perhaps, authority over your life. And I would ask you too, like what happens when you fail those tyrants and kings? When you can't perform to the level that your pride demands, and you can't provide to a level that your fears and anxieties long for, or you can attain, to the goals and expectations and the dreams that you have. Like what happens? What are those tyrants and those kings and those masters that you've bowed to all these years? What do they do to you? And I'll just point out, what will be the theme of the week. That with this King, we fall short, when we fail, when we screw up, when we play the part of, treason to his kingdom. First thing he does, spread wide his arms in mercy and forgiveness and love, and invites you to draw as near to you. Right? Because this is a king, as he's coming into town, he doesn't need some slave behind him whispering, memento mori, memento mori, memento, because he knows he too shall die. Main reason, perhaps, he's riding into Jerusalem because he's going to suffer the curse that ultimately the rebels and the traitors deserve to suffer. Right, he's entering into the city of kings, which will later become the city that kills its prophets, according to Matthew. Why? Because all of the violence, all of the greed, all of the brokenness of that kingdom is going to fall on him. He's going to suffer it unto death in this ultimate twist so that he might crush it in defeat and lead his people into his victory and into that new life. Just real quick, let me just read from the end of Micah. Since we read in Micah 7, that after the pronouncement of curse, like at the end of Micah 7, he then goes on to say, but a day is coming when the walls will be rebuilt, and the foundations will be relaid, and the city will be rebuilt, and all the nations will see. And these nations, they will come out of their other strongholds that they had, resided in for their comfort and security, and they will come and behold the glory of the Lord in their mouth. Hands will be over their mouths, and they will sit silent as they behold the glory of the Lord. And then as they see God's redemption, right? And Micah, like the closing lines of the book of Micah, it's similar to the question in our, who is this? He literally says, who is a God like you, pardoning iniquity, passing over transgression for the remnant of his inheritance? He does not retain his anger forever because he delights in steadfast love. He will again have compassion on us, and he will tread our iniquities underfoot, cast all our sins into the depths of the sea. I'm trying to remember the second verse of that song we sang. On the Mount of Crucifixion, fountains opened deep and wide, and through the floodgates of God's mercy flowed a vast and gracious tide. Grace and love, like mighty rivers, flowed incessant from above, and heaven's peace and perfect justice kissed a guilty world in love. Do you see the presentation of Jesus? It's an unsettling king. He's coming to disrupt. He's coming to tear down. He's coming to overthrow, precisely because he is the King of love. Do you receive him still? And as the kids come, we'll end it there. Do you receive him still? And if you do, I invite you to the services throughout the week where we're going to remember and receive him anew. And I invite you to the table today, where we receive him in the bread and the cup, where we come to this and we remember, right, all that Jesus has done for him. And as we come in faith to this table, the Spirit that leads us in resurrection and life and in that satisfaction, like he meets with us and feeds us and nourishes us and empowers us to play our part as good kingdom servants, right? And so if it is your desire to receive him anew, and by that to let him in, to let him to do all of his uncomfortable, unsettling, disrupting work continually in your own heart, if that's your desire, come to the table, be fed, and let's remember together. If that's not your desire this morning, Scripture would admonish you to withhold, right? If it's not your desire to entrust your life into Jesus, or to maybe you're holding on to some things in your life that you know Jesus is calling you out of, especially if it's in a relationship, whether it's bitterness or dissension or whatever it is, and Jesus is calling on you to make things right, and you're unwilling to allow that work of Christ. Man, Paul admonishes, don't come in an unworthy manner. Don't come in mocking fashion, right? But if it's your desire, maybe even for the first time, to entrust your life to this King of love, here's a great first step, first way to do it. So, our worship team, I invite you to come and lead us. Ushers are going to come, shuffle us towards the tables. Once we've all received, I'll pray, and then we'll celebrate together.